Welcome, I'm the Deadwood Jedi. This is going to be another Raid Shadow Legends video, and we are on the test server today looking at a brand new clan boss speed tune. I'm calling it the Myth Hair. No, not the Myth Air, the Myth Hair, as in rabbit hair. That's what we're going with here. I like to have fun with these things, guys. So anyway, we came up with a speed tune. Me and Short on Skills kind of talked together about it and kind of put something together here where you have the Mytha and Razzlevarg combining to make a unkillable speed tune. Now, I'm gonna state up front, I don't necessarily recommend this build for everybody out there. It's a little bit tricky, especially with stun targeting. That's going to be a major issue. So it's very difficult to make this team affinity friendly, and that's really the trick with it. If, however, you can do that, then this is going to be a team that I think it has a lot of promise to it. And is definitely something that you guys might want to get invested in. But that's kind of the details leading up to it. It does take a little manualing getting into tune. It can work on all affinities, so that's not necessarily an issue. And it can work on all the difficulties as well, right? Ultra Nightmare through Brutal. But it is just a little bit tricky. I will have this on the website. I'm not sure if it'll be up there by the time this video goes out, but it should be like a day or two after that. And I'm going to try and find all the speed ranges in there. But generally, you're going to probably want to stick to what I have in this video, as I know these work. And I'm not 100% certain on others, but we do have some math behind it, so you should be able to figure out some alternate speeds that'll work for you. So it's going to be kind of an interesting tune. Now, the reason why let's jump in. I want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the champions here, so we have an understanding of why this can be a little bit tricky for you. Then we'll go ahead and show the run, and we'll talk about the gear afterwards. Hey, just a friendly reminder, if you haven't already, take a moment and hit that subscribe button as well as that notification bell so you don't miss the next one of these videos that comes out. And of course, if you guys need help with your account, you can go to my website, deadwoodjedi.com, where I'll be happy to look at your squad and make whatever improvements are needed to be made. But, when I'm doing that, I still want to play my own account. That's why I use BlueStacks, which you'll find linked down below in the pinned comment and description of this video. BlueStacks is a great way to run multiple instances of the game on your computer at the same time. And if you enjoyed today's music, we have that SoundStripe link down below in the pinned comment and description of this video as well. Use code DeadwoodJedi, save 15%. Okay, so this is the team I'm bringing in. We obviously have Razzlevarg. We're using the aura, and one of the things you're going to first notice is the speeds are really low for an unkillable team running at these crazy speeds. Razzlevarg, 205 speed. Michinaki, 168. Katura, 200. Seeker, 192. And then Demitha does have to be fast, and we have her at 306 speed. That's a lot of speed on her. But considering everybody else is right around that 200 speed mark, this is actually a very attainable team. The Mytha does hardly any attack, so really all you have to do is make that speed. And with so many other bonuses we have out there now, not to mention 6-star gear, ascended gear, we've got the new Great Hall. There's a lot of options as far as getting your champions to that speed, so I don't think that's prohibitive at all. That said, this does include the aura, so anything I have on the website is going to be true speeds without the aura. You just can put that in as you see fit and as you need. Now, the trick here, and part of the reason why I have stun targeting issues is, as I said, Razzlevarg goes first in this team order. And it's very hard not to have Razzlevarg go first because of the turn meter boost on the A1, because he's putting up the increased speed buff. It's almost always he's going to be first in the turn order. Then we have Seeker, who's going to be like second, because we need Seeker's second attack to give us that turn meter boost. And timing that is important. So between the two of them, they end up going first, which means that bringing in a cleanser doesn't work if either of them get stunned. And that's the big issue, is they can't get stunned. And that's where we have some issues. Because we do have Demitha here, Demitha's A2 can actually reduce the duration of one debuff on all allies. So if we need to cleanse the stun, Demitha can actually do that for us. The problem is, though, he goes after Razzlevarg and Seeker. So what did we do? We brought in Tatura Rhymehyde. Now, you could think to yourself, and this is a reasonable thought, this is what I thought first. Hey, if I just bring in another blue affinity champion, I put Steadfast on those two, it's unkillable, we're all going to have the same HP. The clan boss is going to target the blue affinity champion, like Michinaki here. here's the issue. Razelvarg is taking 3 turns, going on a 3-1 ratio. Seeker taking 2 turns, but has an extra turn in her kit. So he's actually taking 3 turns as well, which means that the passive ability of Seeker can mess it up, because Seeker has a passive that can place an increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns when critically hit. So we know the clan boss likes to avoid champions with increased defense. And we can't really predict when there's going to be a crit or not from the clan boss, which means that if we get crit, there's going to be an increased defense buff on Michinaki, on Tatura, because they both have 2 turn. They're only going at a 2-1 ratio. Everybody else is basically going at a 3-1 ratio. And Demytha is extending the duration of those buffs, which means that increased defense will stay on Michinaki. It will stay on Tatura, but it's going to fall off all the other champions, which is going to make them preferred stun targets. And of course, the 3 champions we don't want to get stunned are going to be Razelvarg, Razelvarg Seeker, and Demytha. And that's what's going to give us some issues. So what do we do about this? Well, there's really kind of 2 options. One, we can go with the steadfast option, and I just make sure to bring in a blue affinity champion with an increased defense buff. Somebody like an Alton, for example, maybe even a Hatatsu. If I can time that increased defense buff to happen before the stun hit, that means everyone will have increased defense, and then all of a sudden the boss is going to avoid anybody with that steadfast mastery. That is one very possible way to make this work. But I think actually the best approach is bring in somebody like Tatura Rhymehide. And a Brogni would be a great example for this, but honestly, anybody with a 1 turn even block debuff ability that also comes, you don't even need it. I was going to say that also comes with an increased defense buff, but honestly, I'm not even sure that you need that. But I would probably bring in a 2-turn block debuff. So somebody like a Grizzled Jarl, for example, there's a 1-turn block debuff, but a 2-turn increased defense buff. What is this going to do? It's going to make everybody that goes before that champion have block debuff up before the stun hits, right? The only person that won't have it would be Demytha. I have Tatura, who has a 2-turn duration. That means it's going to cover both Demytha and everybody on this team. That just makes it a little bit easier. But you could easily do it with an epic that has a 1-turn block debuff. Even a marked could work for this as an option, right? And so what that does is it puts increased defense on everybody. So everybody's an equal target, and it puts block debuff on all your champions coming before. So even if you don't have block debuff, or even if you don't have increased defense, you'll have block debuff. So even if the stun targets Razelvarg or targets Seeker, they'll have block debuffs up, preventing them from actually taking the stun. This is the way I'm working it out. The advantage of this is Michinaki's a defensive-based champion, so I can actually bring in Michinaki and utilize his skills to the utmost because I have Tatura giving us increased defense. So this is kind of my plan. I know that's probably a little bit confusing for you guys. The bottom line is this. We have 3 champions that can't take the stun, and because of the passive with Seeker, they're most likely to take the stun. We have to do something to protect them. That's why I'm bringing in Tatura. That's why you could bring in somebody like, say, a Grizzled Jarl to do the same thing, because the block debuff duration doesn't need to be a long one. The only thing is that you need to make sure between your 2 damage dealers that nobody is ever going to be, that there's never a lack of a neutral affinity champion, right? Those 2 can't be the same affinity. You need at least one of them to be blue. So when you face the red affinity boss, it doesn't target Razelvarg or Seeker. And when the boss isn't blue, that it doesn't target Demytha. That's like the ideal here, really. And if you have the block debuff ability, like we've been talking about, even if the boss does target Raz or Seeker, you should be okay. The harder part with that, though, is getting into the setup of it. That becomes difficult then, right? Because obviously, you're building up into it, you're leading there, and that can be a little bit trickier. So, keeping coverage for the entirety of the fight can always be a little bit difficult. Even with this, I am going to have to manual a little bit as we go forward, just to ensure that everybody's covered in the way we want going through this. And so that's the only thing I kind of have to worry about as we go through here. I'm a little bit nervous that I'm going to have the timing of this off, because I think Seeker might be a little bit vulnerable in there, but that's kind of the idea behind this. Anyway, that's the team we're going to be using here. It goes at a 3-1 ratio, 2-1 ratio for most of them, 3-1 for the support champions. And I'm hopeful we'll get some good damage numbers because we have Seeker and Razzlevarg that are pretty decent damage dealers. And then we're bringing in 2 big hitters, Tatura and Michinaki. So we can keep the debuffs up. We should be in good shape. I did put Raz in a toxic set just to see what we can do poison-wise. I thought that might be pretty fun, but let's jump in. Let's see how the run goes, and we'll talk about it afterwards. Okay, so as we start this off, I have this all preset, so I can just have it set on auto, and it will run. One thing I do need to do here is I'm pretty sure I'm going to need to delay Tatura's increased defense buff, the block debuff ability, for 1 turn in here somewhere. I want to make sure that's actually going to be the case. In fact, I don't think it is. I'm going to let it run on auto here for a minute. I just need to see where the stun goes. I need it to go to Michinaki, or I need it to go to Tatura. And that's going to be like the most important thing here. Now, Tatura is great. I could easily block the debuff, not worry about it, utilizing the veil ability that Tatura has, kind of ensure that. But I'm not really, I'm sure a lot of you don't have Tatura, and I want to make sure this does work for everyone out there. But if we pause it here, there goes the stun. It did go to Razzlevarg. That's going to mess everything up. All right, we're going to try this again. Okay, so I had to make some small changes to the team. Razzlevarg did not have Steadfast Mastery on her, on his kit, right, in his masteries. And so what ends up happening is he becomes a preferred stun target for the boss. By putting Steadfast on, that's not going to be an issue anymore. The other issue that I did find, however, is that Seeker is going to be the stun target for this first stun. Takes a double turn at an inopportune time, which makes him the preferred stun target. Really nothing I can do to avoid that. It's a bit annoying, but is what it is. It just means I'm going to have to add in some delays later on. This actually works out though, because Tatura also, I need to give an extra 1 turn delay on that A2 ability to help, block the stun going forward. So I'm basically going to wait until turn 5. On turn 5, we should actually be in sync, the best of my knowledge, and that's going to be the turn right before the stun. And basically I can just need to do a little bit of manually, and we should be in pretty good shape here. So I'm going to wait for this turn to finish itself up, right? Those stuns, they just delay all your fun skills here. But I'm going to just wait for this turn to finish up, and then at that point we should be in pretty good shape here. So you can see we do get that block damage up, which is great for us. I'm going to let Raz go here. Now Seeker, I do have the A2 ability available, but I just want to use the A1 here. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Quick little manual there. Michinaki's going to go. There goes the Mytha. And now I need the A1 here with Tatura. Boom. And at this point, I should be able to click auto. And if I have everything timed out right, we should be good to go. I haven't done this before. I've literally not run this before, not successfully yet. Still trying to get down all the kinks to it. And there we go. You can see we've got that block debuff and the increased defense that makes everybody a viable target. Done went to Tatura that time. Waited Raz because of Steadfast Mastery. Tatura's next in the team order. Has block debuffs up. Worked out perfectly. Everybody has increased defense up. Nobody's like a preferred stun target that way. The only thing that's going to affect this is going to be the preferred affinities. But because we have 2 champions of different affinities in Tatura and Michinaki, one of the 2 of them will be the preferred stun target regardless of what affinity we face. That's going to make this team work for us. Obviously, not everybody has a Tatura, even though it was a fusion from a while back. Not everybody has a Brogni, even though that was a fusion from a while back. But like I said, this should work by using somebody like a Grizzled Jarl. It's a very attainable champion. Grizzled Jarl is blue affinity, so if you do use Grizz, make sure you bring in somebody else for the other DPS slot that's either red or green affinity, just to make sure that you're going to be able to have all the options there for you. And, if you do that, you should be in great shape, right? The reason why is obviously the myth is neutral no matter what, being void. So you need somebody else. They can be void, they can be red, they can be green. Just need somebody else that's not blue, basically, if you want to be affinity friendly. But you guys can see we're working pretty good here. Now, interesting thing about this team, you don't have to worry about the affinity debuffs. This is why I say a Grizzled Jarl can work. The decreased speed debuff doesn't hurt this team at all. In fact, it actually syncs up sooner if you do have that going on here. So that's not something that you actually have to worry about whatsoever. So there's kind of an interesting thing about how this team works. There's a lot of potential here. Haven't optimized it yet. I'm kind of curious to see what that would look like, you know, really finding, I mean, that's not true. You've optimized this team. I feel like there should be a better comp out there, but I can't find it. Raz is very difficult to speed tune, and so I do think this is the best option. It does go to show why teams like the Myth Air or the Myth Fu are so very good, because Eris actually cleanses the debuffs as she's giving you that increased speed buff, and just the utility of that is really hard to replace. But you guys can see this team's obviously doing really good damage. Michinaki's pretty great. Tatura does really good damage too, so it's not a bad damage comp. And I think honestly bringing in somebody like Brogni would do a lot for us as well. Brogni will hit pretty close to as hard as Tatura does. We wouldn't have the increased defense for Michinaki, but it would allow us to bring in an attack-based champion instead. Maybe somebody like a Draco or a Gentora would be a really good option. So there's more than a few ways to go about doing this. Even champions like a Nax or Fane would be fantastic in this kind of a comp, right? You can't use ally attack. That's obviously going to throw things off, especially for affinity. Razzleberg has that A1 turn meter boost, so anything that's going to make him take a counterattack or an ally attack is going to be a no-go. You can't bring in counterattack, so no Martyr in this kind of a team, no Skull Crusher, because for the same reasons. But I mean, you don't really ever need those things. It's a pretty solid squad here, I would say. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and let this run. We'll come back towards the end, see how we did. Forgive me, I had a post-fight costume change here, but boy, did we do some good damage, huh? I mean, that's not too shabby. I can definitely get down with that. And as usual, Raz did some really good damage for us, right? Now, obviously, this is always a tricky team, being able to do this with Demitha and Razzlevarg. There's a lot of, issues as far as stun targeting that's really important, and we have to go over. And so all that stuff does make this team more than a little tricky. That's definitely something you want to keep in mind when you're going about building it. But I suppose we can get a little bit more into that as we get into the champions. So, I mean, pretty good damage results. I'm very happy with that. Obviously, this is a team that will work for some of you out there. So before I show you the stats of the champions, and we're going to run through that pretty quickly here, I think put that in the background as I'm doing my wrap up of this. I want to show you this tune that we have going on so you can kind of get an idea of, how it's supposed to work. Now, first off, the speeds are kind of flexible, right? When we're doing Void. Now, here's the thing. I recorded that whole run. I did all that talk about how it can work on Spirit, and I kind of can. But here's the thing. It's Red Affinity that's going to create serious issues for us. Spirit Affinity, not as much, actually. Interesting thing about Spirit Affinity is even if we take this team here, right? If I let's put in a DPS. I'm gonna put in Suwai here just as a placeholder for Tatura. If I put in for Spirit Affinity Suwai, you can see even with the slow debuff, this team will stay in sync. It doesn't mess it up, and I believe the speeds I'm gonna have on the website are going to work with that. Now, I haven't been able to actually test it in game. So I can't guarantee that it's going to work. This is just the best I've been able to come up with in the 2 weeks that we've had this champion on the test server. I've been able to play with it. So that's kind of where we're at with it. But on Void, obviously, it definitely works. And you can see it syncs just like we did in the run. Now, the interesting thing about the run is Seekers takes a stun right here on turn 2, right? So this turn 3 does the A1. Interesting thing is, that means that everything gets pushed one turn, right? Because the cooldowns don't go. So here on turn 4, he takes an A1. And then here on turn 5, we're still in sync, even without Seeker using that A2 ability there. But I have to make sure, that's why we manualed that A1 skill right there, just to make sure that we stay in sync. And then I was using, obviously, Tatura, right? I was using Tatura for this, and I was using Tatura to block the stun. Because as I mentioned, the stun is likely going to go to Seeker or Razzlevarg, especially because of Seeker's passive. That gives everybody an increased defense buff. It's not all the time. It's a little bit hard to determine when it happens. And as you can see, Seeker does take 3 turns, just like Razzlevarg, which means that buff falls off. And that means that they are the preferred target. Even with the Mythic extending it, it's not going to matter. The buff's going to fall off them, but it's going to stay on the 2 DPS champions, in this case, Dwarboy and Tatura, and that means that they won't get stunned, but they're the ones that we actually need to get stunned, because there's only 3 champions that can't get stunned. It's the 3 that won't have that increased defense buff on them, right? Razzlevarg, Seeker, and Demitha. So how do we avoid that? Well, obviously, we can have one of the DPS be a weak affinity, right? So when we're facing blue affinity boss, we bring in a green affinity champion. When we're facing a red affinity or a green affinity boss, we bring in a red affinity champion. That's a great way to go about doing that. The other way to go about doing that is to bring in another increased defense buff champion or a block debuff champion. Either way, that's going to help neutralize that field. So in this case, we're actually doing both. Because we have Tatura now with a 2-turn delay, this is why I give him an extra delay later on in the fight. With a 2-turn delay, you can see he puts block debuff and increased defense up right before the stun. And that's vital for us, allowing it so when we're facing a red affinity boss, because remember, Raz and Seeker are both blue affinity champions. When we're facing a red affinity boss, that's going to neutralize it, right? And so that'll allow a blue affinity champion, in our case, it was Michinaki that we had in there, to be able to take the stun. Or even if we don't have a blue affinity champion, because we're placing block debuff on there, even if Razzleberg or if Seeker takes a stun, they're not going to get stunned because they're going to have block debuffs up. So either way, this is a viable strategy. So we could bring in an Underpriest Brogni if we wanted to, and that would work just as well. So that's always something to kind of keep in mind. You can use a Grizzled Jarl, you can use any champion that has a 1-turn block debuff on a 3-turn cooldown or a 6-turn cooldown, but it has to be able to fit within the cycle of this team because it has to happen right before the stuns, right? So either every 6 attacks, because remember those DPS are taking 2 attacks every turn, or every 3 attacks, right? Something, one or the other. There's only a way to do, or every 2 turns, which nobody exists that can do that. So those are kind of the options. A cleanser doesn't work for this, unfortunately, is kind of one of the negatives. Now, you could bring in somebody like an Alton. Alton actually would not be a bad choice. He'd give us an increased defense buff on a 3-turn cooldown. The hard part is he's then the preferred stun target. And the first time he takes a stun, it's going to throw off the timing of his skills, which means everything would go to poop again. So if you wanted to use somebody like that, the big key would either be making sure that that champion is not blue affinity, right? You'd want to bring in a green or red affinity champion that brings increased defense. Or the other alternative is you bring in another blue affinity champion that can take the stun, like a Michinaki, and that would work in that case then as well. So, it's a long way of saying it's very complex to time this one out, tune it out, and the stun especially becomes problematic. And the same issues you have with blue affinity are going to be the same issues you're going to have with void affinity, because again, that increased defense buff makes those champions that the boss does not want to stun, right? So, unless you can reapply it or apply block debuff, you're going to have a big issue with this comp. That's why this is not an ideal team. Not something I really recommend, but it is another option for you guys out there. A lot of you have been asking for the Mytha team, so this is the best I could come up with in the time that I've had to play around with Raz. Hopefully I'll come up with something else, or hopefully my team is, or hopefully one of you will, because Razzlevarg is in the calculator. You can play around. If you come up with a better team, let me know. I'd love to either build it and try it out, or at least put it on the website, one or the other. But yeah, let's take a look at the champions real quick so you can see the stats that I have on them. And we'll talk a little bit about this tune and, I think what it means and what Razzlevarg means as a champion. So as you guys can see the stats floating in the background here, I just want to talk a little bit about Razzlevarg, what he means, as far as, many of you guys are fusing him. Some of you are regretting it. If you decide not to, some of you aren't. Some of you are happy not to do this. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about what he means for Clan Boss. And I think the basis of it is he's a solid champion, but he's incredibly difficult to utilize sometimes. I think a very early account, actually something like my free to play, makes Razzlevarg a much better option than some later game accounts. And the reason why is the speeds on some of these builds, especially the 2-1 ratio teams, are way more reasonable than most other teams, right? The increased accuracy buff makes building your champions way easier than they would be otherwise. But as you start getting further along, as you have more options, I don't think he's really an ideal champion for Clan Boss. Obviously, he can hit hard, and obviously he can do a lot of stuff, but the teams that you have to build around him, especially if you're trying to build one of these unkillable teams, can be pretty complex and a little bit difficult to tune. And so in those situations, it's not like my preferred choice, right? If I have a team and I have to either use Seeker, or I have to use Razzlevarg, or I have to use Deacon, I'm going to choose Deacon or Seeker most of the time. I think Razzlevarg does bring a lot to the table, including extra damage, but I don't think it really outpaces what you're doing with some of the teams that we've already had. This team included. Frankly, building this team, I got to get a renewed appreciation for how good Eris is. Because Eris cleanses the stun. Eris has a free counterattack. Eris can place a lot of poisons in Toxic Gear, as many as Razzlevarg did. Doesn't do as much damage raw, but really makes it so much easier to build that it's worth not having that headache of trying to figure out who's going to take the stun and what am I going to do for affinities and yada, yada, yada. That's definitely something that I didn't appreciate before. In fact, building through this team, one of the interesting things about it was obviously, it can work on Spirit Affinity without cleansing or blocking the Spirit debuff. But when I brought in Tatura and I was testing Tatura in the calculator, I realized pretty quickly that that's going to be an issue because blocking some of the slow debuffs wasn't really working for me with the speeds that I have on this team. So I need to go back in and figure out, what happens if we do block some of the debuffs. Is this still affinity friendly? How does that work exactly? And obviously when I get all that figured out, I'll have that included on the build on the website. But it's a little bit of an incomplete right now. Now, do I think that there's going to be something that gets discovered that is as good, that's better than this? Yes, I do actually. I think Razzlevarg, one of the best things about him is he opens up new possibilities for Clan Boss teams. And that's very exciting because we're literally scratching the surface. You got to remember that I come up with a lot of tunes, my team comes up with a lot of tunes, but I'm the only one with access to this champion right now. When everybody has access, all of a sudden people start trying stuff that they wouldn't try before. And that's going to create a lot of new stuff out there. So I'm actually excited to see what you guys, the player base, come up with as far as improving this team. So as always, if you do come up with something, go in my Discord. There's a whole section for new tunes found. Go in there, post something, let my mods know about it. And we can hopefully, if it's viable, I'll build it, do a video on it, and put it back up on the website. That's kind of how this works. So anyway, guys, I just want to say, it's been really fun working on with Razzlevarg, and I'm excited to continue doing that once I actually fuse the guy. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting champion. Makes a lot of these tunes are very difficult, very speed specific, and then little tweaks can throw things off a lot. And so you do have to kind of be careful with that. But otherwise, I think he's very viable, very valuable champion for a lot of the people out there. I would say most people watching this video, he's going to be somebody that's very valuable for him. If you have an advanced account, obviously probably not as much, certainly not for clan boss, but he is going to be helpful in a lot of different areas of the game. And if you're interested to see, exactly how helpful he is for early game accounts, start watching my free to play. That's what we're doing. We're on the road to Hydra right now, and I'm going to be using Raz because I actually was able to fuse him, and obviously he's going to be an essential part of that team. I have like 5 champions that are level 60, so yeah, he's going to be pretty important. But anyway, guys, that's the video that we got for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you're excited about getting Razzlevarg. We're almost at the end of this fusion, so I wish you all very good luck if you are fusing him. If you're not, that's okay. You're not in trouble. You didn't miss out on somebody unbelievable or anything like that, but he does have a unique kit. So if in the future you pull him, you should be excited. But anyway, don't forget to subscribe. And guys, till next we meet, I'm the Deadwood Jedi.